Okay, welcome to episode 121 of an Evolving Man podcast. Today I'm delighted to be speaking to Ben Cole. Ben is a storyteller, cinematographer, director, and all round filmmaker. His films include One Giant Leap and Time of the Sixth Son, and also the upcoming film Boarding on Insanity. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you. How lovely to see you, Piers.
When did we last speak? Was it yesterday?
Yesterday, the day before, today, it's like a virtual office
It
going
is.
into work.
It is. It is. So we thought today that we would talk about the documentary,
Mm.
and today we're going to talk a bit about what was has been our journey. It's now been nearly 3 years. So I'd love for us to begin about what is this boarding on insanity film?
Right, it's a really good question. I mean, when you and I met 3 or 4 years ago, probably 3 years ago, we walked around a men's group
Mm,
workshop, and you told me about your podcasts, and you told me about your fascination about boarding schools and were they fit for purpose, etc. And I told you about my boarding school experience, and we both kind of, I think you said we could make a film about it. You make films, that's why don't we make a film about it? And in that moment, I was thinking about this morning, in that moment, it was like I just got a massive yes. Let's do this. And I suppose um, since I was a child, since I was an 11-year-old kid, and I used to go for walks in the village or escape boarding school and go for a walk in the village with the kids in my class. And they would ask me to keep watch in the trenches on the sides of the road while they smoked a cigarette, keep watch for the headmasters or the headmaster who might be driving past and see them. And while they were smoking, they would tell me the stories of their childhood. Um, and it was so horrendous as an 11-year-old to hear this, but it was very connecting. It
mm,
was very, I felt like I bonded with these kids. And like I had a friend, and I had so few friends at boarding school because I was a so-called posh lower middle class kid amongst so many working class traumatized children, both boys and girls. And we would get back to the school gates, and they were very worried about me sharing what they'd shared with me. And they used to punch and kick me and say, "Don't you dare tell anyone what I've told you, and
mm,
I can't be your friend." And that to me was a terrible thing because I needed friends. And I thought because we'd shared our grief and our trauma together, well, he'd shared it with me, because I had a pretty happy childhood growing up. Also,
mm,
I thought, um, until, one of the main reasons I think I was bullied at school was because my parents were together. They'd turn up and we'd look like a happy family. And I think so many of the kids didn't have happy families. Um, until the day I left boarding school 2 years later, and my father sat me down and said, "We're getting a divorce." And I just wanted to run back to school going, "I'm one of you guys, I'm not the, but, you know, I didn't want to run back to school because it was a horrible time. So when we would started sharing our stories together, you invited me to do the podcast, which was number 19 out of
17.
17 out of 121. Um, that I just thought there was a voice inside of me that always wanted to make a film that changed had a potential to change what happened to me and so many other young kids at boarding school. Um, and I could draw every single square of my boarding school.
Mm.
I know I can walk through the school. It's like the memories of being bullied, the memories of the traumatic times of of the teachers and the headmaster calling me into his study and saying, "Your grandfather's dead. Now off you go back to school." That kind of lack of empathy, I
Mm.
think actually, and I was thinking about this morning, that the man I am today is because of that experience of boarding school,
Mm.
but also the troubles that I have today, my fear of intimacy, that my fear of of around people, around all those issues. I would be the man I am today, but I would be less anxious. I would be if somebody had sat me down and said, "Are you okay?"
Mm.
If somebody, when I'd left the boarding school, had said, what happened to you? What went on?" But like so many boarding school boys, I left boarding school and it was forgotten. Nobody ever
Mm.
talked to me about it. And I was a mess. I chewed my fingernails. I had facial tics. I was nervous. I was anxious for the next 10 or 20 years. And I suppose why I wanted to make this film with you
Mm.
was I could see in you the experience and the common mission to to end the cover up, to actually ask people what did they go through, and to get the conversation started about what do we do. You
Mm.
know, we have a mission with this film to ban early boarding, to have emotionally trained, trauma informed teachers, to have mandatory reporting, these three issues. But I always remember my stepfather turning around to me and saying, "You can't criticize unless you have an alternative." And I think this film aims, and what I wanted to do with this film was start a conversation about it's not working. Boarding schools don't work. So what else do we do with these children that are not wanted in their families, are abandoned, dropped, dumped onto onto this school ground that is not designed for care?
No.
I was 11. You were 11, weren't you?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Just
You
turned
know, we
11.
weren't 6. I mean, imagine for me to imagine going to boarding school at 6 um, is horrendous. It's the
Mm.
idea, of a child. I have a 6-year-old step grandchild now,
Mm.
and the idea of putting him in the car with a case, a trunk. I remember my trunk. And putting him in the car and saying, "You're going to live somewhere else now. Other people are going to be in charge of you, and there's going to be 500 kids with
Mm.
maybe 3 or 4 tutors, masters, just looking after you." The idea of masters, looking after you, who are not going to. You're not going to be cuddled. You're not going to have a teddy bear. You're not going to have anywhere safe. That
Mm.
was the thing for me. The only safe place in my boarding school was the laundry room.
Right.
And I used to go to the tuck shop and buy a Mars bar
Mm.
and run to the laundry room before anybody could get me and stuff this Mars bar in my mouth until I couldn't chew. A little 11-year-old mouth wasn't that big. Um, because I was so afraid somebody would come along and steal it off me or hit me to grab the Mars bar. That was my safe space in boarding school. There was nowhere else. The dormitory wasn't safe. It's 30 kids, 30 beds, mice running around the floor. So to answer your question,
Mm.
I wanted to make a film that brings to light the experience of what children have at boarding school, common
Mm.
experience, and the effects. And then you brought up this idea of our leaders, our people in power, people who have control and over the laws around how we live, all went to boarding school at 6. Or most of them, or quite a lot of them did. And
More, yeah, I think six. I think it's like seven. David Cameron, Richard Branson, Boris was 11. And I think what kind of drew me into that idea of the leaders is reading their stories.
yeah,
People have said to me, well, your story, you know, of what happened, sexual abuse and suicide, that was just a one-off. And what I found when I started to read these biographies, it's like, oh, actually, very few. I mean, some of them do say, "Oh, it was good. It was the making of me." But then they share their stories, and you're like, "That's really deep trauma from things like rape, from sexual abuse, trying to commit suicide." Richard Branson, uh, you know, the sexual abuse going on at Ashdown House where Boris Johnson was. The amount of neglect. Rachel Johnson, Boris Johnson's sister, saying she was there a year or two younger than Boris, saying she was so hungry she used to eat toothpaste, you know. And it's just for me when I saw all these stories, it was like, oh my God, it's not just me or it's not just Ben. It's
yeah,
actually
yeah,
many
yeah.
of us. And then as we started to kind of explore. I mean, the retreat. How was the retreat? Because that's part of the film. Is we go on to
Yeah, and
and our stories.
that was very interesting because I think you suggested that we came up with this idea of having a retreat, a 4-day retreat, and I've done lots of workshops and retreats, and I find them innovative and transformative.
Mm,
And I know that traditional psychotherapy has an idea that you can't cure anyone in 4-day workshop, but I've been to workshops where people have transformed their lives in those few days because it's an intense period. And I think there was an idea that I was never, nobody ever heard my grief and trauma.
mm,
I was never invited to share what it was like. And so there was a deep desire in me to collect 10 people and really listen to them and really have the opportunity to sit down and say, what was it like? What did you go through? And to really have the grief and the trauma and the anger and the shame and all that just heard and to find out what happened when that was. So, I didn't want to go to a therapist for an hour for 7 years and eventually, maybe right at the end of a session, have a few tears running down my neck. I wanted a cathartic, I wanted to open Pandora's box. I mean, my mother was a child psychologist and she used to
mm,
say to me in the 70s and 80s, don't open the box. And I've wanted to open the box my whole life. And in a way, my filmmaking is about opening the box, about going over to Pandora's box, opening it out. Because one thing I learned from indigenous spiritual men
mm.
in some of the films that I've made is that the gold always hides in the shadow, in
Yes.
the dark.
Mm,
And it doesn't hide in the beautiful sunny commercials. It doesn't hide in the lovely comedy dramas. It hides in the dark despair. And in a way, that's why the retreat was so important. And
mm.
I know that that's controversial.
Yeah.
I know that the film, we've gone close to the line in sharing that some of these emotions. And in the first cut we did, I know I went too far. I pushed. the edge of the envelope. I wanted people to see and experience the grief, but I think that that was too much.
Mm.
And my wife said to me the other day, "You've always wanted to show deep emotion in your films."
Mm.
Um, and yeah, I mean, I'm English, British. Keep calm, carry on, stiff upper lip. Let's not show feelings. And I
Mm.
think that I'm jealous of Italians and Spanish, French,
Mm. Mm.
who really feel their feelings and share their feelings amongst people. I love French cinema, and people lose it and scream and shout and cry and get depressed. And I had a movement psychology teacher at drama school when I went to drama school who said, it's always the opposites going on. So when you're crying and screaming and shouting and having a tantrum, inside you're calm and relief.
Mm.
There's calm relief.
Interesting. Yeah.
And I've always been interested in that. So, and I do recognize that showing too much on a film can turn an audience off, can make people think, oh, it's manipulative or whatever. So there's a fine line, and that's been something I've really learned by making this film
Mm.
is how close to the edge can you get? How much do you uncover about people's feelings?
Yeah. It's interesting. You're talking there about emotion, the importance of sharing that we've kind of the stiff upper lip or keep calm and carry on. And I was talking to someone on my podcast yesterday about leadership and how now the old model was the command and control leadership. It was important for us in order to be part of the empire, to, keep calm and carry on. But we are now transitioning in the last 10, 20 years that command and control leadership does not work anymore. And I was talking to him, and he works with a lot of CEOs and senior people in business across the world, saying that they found that the command and control style no longer works with Gen Z, the young generation, the 20s. You can't tell them what to do. You've got to connect emotionally. And he was pointing out something really fascinating that AI will take care of the intellectual side. What AI can't take care of is the emotional side. And so that's the skill for the future is emotional intelligence. And if we don't change, we'll become obsolete. We've got to adapt. And I think that for me is one of the beauties of the film is like saying that, yeah, we've got to be emotionally intelligent. We've
Yeah.
got to connect. Oh, what do I feel? And I've found it, yeah, very
I mean,
powerful.
I totally agree with you there. And one of Kevin Allen, who appears
Mm.
very briefly in the film, is, a top world class marketing and advertising executive. And that's one thing he says is that we have to empathize. You
Mm.
cannot anymore have that command and control. However, look at look at Trump. He's been voted in again, unanimously, and he's a command and control person. So it's still rewarded, it's still seen as a strong, powerful leader if you lie and you cheat and you break the laws, but make the promises that people want to hear. And I think we've got a long way to go.
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
and that's why I think this film essentially is a conversation waiting to happen. It provokes a conversation. We're not suggesting we know the answers, we're suggesting the answers need to be known.
Mm.
And, there are millions of people who are upset when Trump blames a neurodiversity for an accident between a helicopter and an aeroplane, and has no empathy. Well, he's a traumatized man. His brother drank himself to death. There's this idea that we just have to survive. And what Nick Duffel says in the film about a strategic survival personality, I think is a pandemic in the world. I think we're all conditioned now to be terrified of the truth and desperate to have a leaders who paint a picture that everything's going to be great again, without looking in Pandora's box. And I think
Mm.
the beauty of documentaries is that we can open that box and have a look at what everyone's covering up.
Yeah,
As
yeah,
Renton says in the film, are we a nation of covering up? Is that going to help? And I think we've covered up too much. So, Boarding on
yeah.
Insanity is a film that uncovers something so that
Mm.
maybe we can have that conversation about what to do that's better. What's an even better idea of boarding schools?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that idea of cover up that's come up again in the last couple of weeks with the grooming scandals here in the UK. And then, last year, October time, it was the church, and covering up John Smythe. And then before that was the post office. Before that, the blood scandal. As Alex says in the film, we are a nation addicted to cover up. And yeah, and I kind of almost feel psychologically a lot of our leaders, we learn to cover up in these schools emotionally. You cover up our emotions. So what you learn is, I quote this quite often in the podcast. Jung says the psychological rule says that when an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside as fate. If you've learned to cover up inside yourself, to not acknowledge emotions, to suppress and push down, then you are going to project that out. You're going to cover up in the world. And I think, yeah, I like what you say about this film is about, yeah, just having a conversation about things which have been covered up. So what for you, Ben, have been some of the highs, highlights of doing this film?
Um, uh, well, one of the great highs is watching the people who came to the retreat
Mm,
and seeing the transformation, seeing the clarity, seeing, you and I sat on Zoom and we interviewed everybody that was interested in coming on the retreat. And I was shocked with the shutdown, despair, the trauma, the dysfunctional lives of the people that we interviewed. We have a WhatsApp group where everybody comments and supports each other post. Now it's almost a year now. And the WhatsApp group is still supporting each other. There's still so much joy. It's like a family. And that's one of the joys for me. I remember on the last day of the retreat, I remember sitting around and listening to everybody on how it was for them, how the retreat was for them, and just hearing the joy that was coming out from that, the relief that I've been seen, I've been heard. I remember crying in the middle of the circle, just collapsing in tears in the circle. And it was tears of relief. It
mm,
was a little 11-year-old boy that wanted to help these poor kids around me, wanted to
mm,
help myself, and was totally unaware. And that this realization that there is a way of helping people by hearing them, by listening,
mm,
just by asking the question, what ails you? What's your problem? What's going on for you? What was it like? And then listening to it. Um, Instead of covering it up and going, oh no, it's all going to be great. I'm going to get a great job. I'm going to be powerful. I'm going to, I've witnessed in the film industry how so many of my friends went to boarding school,
yeah.
but it was only made the trailer and started putting it out there that like 30 of my male and female friends would ring me up and say, oh, I went to boarding school. I never knew. I'd known them for like 20 or 30 years. And I never knew they went to boarding school. One guy rang me up and said, I took my one of my tutors to court. I stood up in court. He got 40 years in prison for what he did to us. And he was in tears. And he said, thank you so much
Mm.
for giving me this opportunity to cry watching your promo. And that was a 3 minute promo, you know. So the great hope really is that it creates a safe and cathartic conversation between people where they can start to talk about it, start to be heard, and some of this covered up, pushed away into the shadow. I don't want to talk about it, which screws us all up.
Mm.
Screws,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Thank you. So the highlight's been the retreat. I mean,
yeah.
for me, the highlight as well has been the retreat and also going off filming, meeting up with you guys. Well, I think the retreat was very powerful. It was very emotional for me. Obviously, I was part of the retreat, and I think I found that very, yeah, kind of real highlight. I think obviously we traveled a lot. We went up to Edinburgh twice, once to Glasgow, obviously to see interview Gabor, being down to London 4, 5, 6 times to interview
Okay, can I
Joy.
just interrupt you? I just want to tell a little bit of the, or share a little bit of the story of meeting Gabor, because we went to a 1 day workshop with about 400 people in the room
Yeah, yeah.
in the hope, we went all the way up to Glasgow in the hope that we might be able to convince him to give us 20 minutes on camera. And when we got there, we were told by a lovely lady that helped us, gave
Mm,
us tickets to come along, that all crews had been denied any filming. He wasn't doing any filming.
mm,
And that was like a bit shattering. And we weren't allowed to film at the event. And it was like, oh, well, okay, maybe we'll just get that. And then you and I decided to go up at lunchtime with a book to get it signed. And your book was just full of those yellow little tabs. You must show people. It's
yeah,
astounding.
yeah, yeah. So
Yeah, look at that. How many? Just turn it
uh,
sideways and show. Yeah, look at that. So we went up to get that signed, and I think he noticed that you'd read it and marked it.
yeah, he said the words. He said, "Wow, you've read that," and I replied, I said, "Yes, well, we're making a film about trauma-infused politics, which is one of his chapters in his book." And I believe his reply was, "Wow, that sounds amazing." And I said, "We'd love you to be in the film."
Yeah,
And he says, "Yeah, email me." And so then
yeah,
he gave you his email address,
yeah.
and uh, we,
And it was amazing because he said, "Oh, I've got a lot to say about all that."
mm,
And
mm,
I think I'm just so grateful of his open-minded, you know, and then of course he was tired. He's in his 80s. It was a lot to do that
late
day.
70s, 77, I think he
See?
was at the time. Yeah, yeah,
Um,
late.
and we had to come all the way back home and then drive all the way back during a rail strike to get there by 10 a.m. to get what was essentially a 20-minute interview. Um, and we managed to struggle about an hour out of him, which was great, on his
Mm,
way to the airport. Um, and it was amazing how outspoken he was. Um,
mm,
and
mm,
it is amazing in the film how a lot of the Canadian and American born people
mm,
are can see clearly, objectively about um, the British politics and all that. But it's not just British politics. One of our
mm,
great hopes of the film was that it was a world thing because British
mm,
boarding schools were farmed out, copied, cloned all
mm,
over the world. And as you see in the film, an opportunity to see just how many people around the world in positions of power and leadership are actually went to boarding school.
mm.
And
Yeah.
there's a concept in the film industry that a lot of people want to be a star or famous in films because they have this illusion that the love of the public will make up for the lack of love they got as a child.
Mm, mm,
Um, and when they get it, it doesn't fulfill the empty tank inside of them. Um, lot of the times I've spent with movie stars, and they've said they got famous, and they have to project this strategic survival personality of, yes, I'm happy and I'm famous and I'm rich and this is all great. But underneath that,
mm,
they can't actually be honest about how difficult it is, how they can't go down to the supermarket, how they can't have a normal life.
mm, mm,
And it's just, I'm used to that kind of world. And why am I used to that kind of world? Why did I find it easy? Because I'm a boarding school person. Uh,
yeah.
and I only went for 2 years, but it had such a profound effect upon me and my life. And also changed me, and I am lucky in that I decided not to bury it all. I decided to explore it, um,
Mm,
and to do some work on myself. And I think certainly the thing that I see about you is that the work you've done on yourself has turned you into a deeply empathetic and kind and understanding human being, which was the opposite to what we were shown us in boarding school. So,
yeah, yeah,
you have
yeah.
a phrase for it, um, the advantage of trauma. What do you
Oh
call
yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's this post-traumatic. It's not my phrase. It's Stephen Joseph, Professor Stephen Joseph, talks about post-traumatic growth, and it's this idea that our wound becomes our gift. And I think this is where, that's what some people say to me. Oh, well, you're just saying boarding school's bad, and it's like, it's not just my story. There's other people's stories, but we can. I almost feel that boarding school it takes us up to about 40% in ability. It caps us. We can't go any further because without emotion, you can't really reach your full potential.
it?
But once you start to do the work you're saying, the inner work, and you unlock your emotions, then you can really unlock your potential. And
Yeah,
I think that's the idea with post-traumatic growth. It's not, I think I see there's really three stages in trauma, certainly around boarding school. Is the first one is dissociation. You disconnect. Oh, it was great. I loved it. But you're capped at 40%. You can't go past that because you haven't then gone to stage two, which is the grieving process.
yeah,
What Joseph Campbell says, into the darkness, into the valley, where you grieve the liminal space. And it's like, oh my God, this is how it feels to have lived that experience. But then the third stage, some of us a lot get lost in that second stage, in victim, in the pain and the how difficult it was. But then we've got to then move into stage three, which, as Joseph Campbell says, is returning with the boon, returning with the gift, the gold. Robert Bly says, I quote this a lot, you know, whatever our wound was, whether blaming mother, shaming father, is where we will give our greatest gift back to society. So I think once we have seen that, oh yeah, actually, boarding school felt like this, we grieve, and then the third process then is,
yeah.
yeah, it's like with this film, for me, I found it quite challenging in times. It's like, and wanting to give up, but knowing that I actually know this story really needs to get told.
Yeah.
And
I
the,
agree with you, Piers. I had a really, it was difficult for me. We've been working on this for like 2.5 years, and sometimes I didn't want to put my head back in my trauma bucket and sit there for hours and hours and hours working on this interview and building this whole thing. Sometimes that was the hardest thing to do, but it's uncovered a real mission. and a real, and some of my feelings. And I wish I'd done that when I was 14, 15 and got out of school, uh,
Mm.
or when I was 20, 22. I mean, luckily I went to a drama school that was a method drama school and had some psychology, and I could explore some of those feelings.
Mm.
But I wish I'd had that earlier. I wish I'd had some trauma informed person asking me, "You've just had 2 years of trauma. What's going on here?" And that's in a way my great ambition for the film is
Yeah.
to get all people who deal with children that have trauma in their lives to recognize what's
Mhm.
going on for them, that something is going on, and to ask those kids, how are you, what's going on for you, and
Mhm.
what are you going through. um,
Yeah. Yeah. I hear this more and more. I was at a event with Suzanne Zedijk, who's in the film. And they were talking about, becoming more adverse childhood experience aware, becoming more trauma informed and just changing rather than saying you're going to discipline the child or punish the child. It's like, actually, no, we're going to speak. It's like relationship building. So moving from command and control in schools more into emotionally intelligent.
yeah,
And a consultant clinical psychologist I spoke on the podcast about a month ago called Warren Larkin, who will come onto uh, the, the the evenings we're going to be doing. Maybe we'll talk about that in a bit. But
yeah,
he says the cost of some of the people he's worked with um, to the healthcare system, on average, it's about £3 to £4 million for people who've been through trauma. How much it costs through, mental health intervention, psychiatrists, drugs. And he says one woman he worked with was about £9 million just for one person's. And he says if at the beginning, when they were 13, 14, 15, and you just asked the question, what ails you? Or, and you then gave them appropriate, counseling, or he says that would save millions of pounds. And
yeah,
we just don't do that.
yeah,
So maybe let's segue a little bit, Ben,
yeah.
into, we've got the film, it's coming out. Let's just share what's the plan for releasing the film?
Right, so we have a world premiere screening at the Rio Cinema in
East London, Dalston.
Dalston on the 1st of March. It's
Mm.
a 400-seat cinema. We want lots of people to come along. We've got a Q&A afterwards with a panel of experts and some people that are in the film. It's going to be an amazing afternoon. It's at 1:30 in the afternoon. The doors open for 2 o'clock screening and it finishes about 4. I think it's going to be a great day. And we're hoping on the 8th of March to go up to Edinburgh and do the same thing up in Edinburgh with the wonderful Suzanne Zedijk, who is just amazing in the film.
Mm.
And she is well known for her work with childhood trauma and developmental psychology. So um, she's going to be hosting that event up there. So, and we hope to do loads of other around the country, but those are the first two. And then, do you want to talk about the webinars?
Yeah,
Because
yeah. So we just thought rather than just launching the film, so the launch date for the film is the 15th of March, but we wanted to build up some anticipation for the film. So we're going to do 3 evenings, very similar to the Bowlby Institute kind of a year and a half ago. And it will be, 1.5 hours. The first evening, we'll be talking about boarding school, how it impacts children. And so far, we've got Joy Shavrian, who's definitely coming, and potentially Warren Larkin, and possibly Suzanne Zedijk. And then we're going to just talk, well, what's the impact? So we'll do 60 minutes of interview, conversation, and then 30 minutes of Q&A. Then that's the 5th. And then on the 10th, we'll be doing, that's the Monday, we'll be talking more about, well, leadership and the global impact of boarding schools. So that would be Nick Duffel will be speaking, Martin Lloyd Elliott, who's in the film, who's a leading leadership expert, and then we've got potentially another couple of guests we're going to invite for that. And then on the 13th, which is a Thursday, we'll be more looking at the path of healing, the path of action. So that we've got Dino Nocivelli, who's a partner of a law firm who does a lot of campaigning for ICSA, for no, basically child sexual abuse, but he's kind of been involved in ICSA, and then possibly another couple of guests there. And yeah, it's just to kind of create that community. And then on the 15th, we will launch. People can download the film and watch it.
And
And
not just the film. I mean, I'm working at the moment on extras, so you could see the whole retreat.
mm,
Obviously, it's not a 4 day film, but with sort of highlights of the retreat. You can see the extended interviews from all our main speakers. And I think that that's going to be really fascinating once you to
mm,
help that conversation happen and to because an hour and 72 minutes you can't include enough really, and
mm,
there's so much packed into the film, but
mm,
there's so much more that our speakers talk about,
mm. Yeah, yeah.
and conversations with you really, let's talk a bit about the movement. This isn't just a film, this is a beginning.
Yeah, so I think there's so many people doing so many great things, like Chris Sprach with Seen and Heard. You've got, you know, they've been looking at campaigning for abolishing early boarding schools. They've been looking at the legal aspect of that. There's obviously Nick, who's doing amazing work with boarding school survivors. You've got Joy. At, at the moment, we're looking at doing a research study into the impact of boarding schools in Africa, and then that will eventually spread to the UK and across the world. So just to bring more awareness. So I think this film is, you know, a chance for the people in the movement to coalesce. And, I think that's one of the things that Chris Brach has been doing and Seen and Heard have been doing is they've been he's saying there's so many different strands, so many pe different people doing things. Let's all coalesce
Yeah,
and bring these things together.
yeah.
And so for me, yeah, it's like using that wound as impetus for growth. Let's change this. I think boarding schools, yeah, they served their purpose in the 19th, 20th century, but now we're in the 21st century. They no longer, for me, they no longer work. They're meant to create leaders, great leaders. So many people go into positions of power, but that doesn't happen for me. Leadership is all about relationships. You break the attachment with a child, what happens? Well, you know, you therefore diminish the importance of relationships. And I just think, yeah, we have to find a new way, and that's the kind of the fourth strand really is educating a new set of leaders, right? How do we become emotionally intelligent?
As Martin says in the film, his great hope is the next generation. We
Yeah.
have to be seen to be accountable for what our generation has done and encourages, and then help the next generation, which is true eldership, not make the same mistakes that we've done. It's too easy to just pop a pill and feel better. Um, it's what I think the job of elders is to recognize their own mistakes and then to counsel a new generation not to make those. So, in a way, we are stepping into um, our eldership by getting this movement together to help a new generation become trauma informed and it, you know, hopefully pass a law that if you witness abuse happening, you have to report it.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
That's so important. I witnessed so much abuse in my boarding school, and everybody said, "Oh, be quiet. Don't say anything.
Same
Just
with ours.
keep calm, carry on. This is normal." And at
Mm.
11-year-old, I accepted that it was normal, or I just disassociated. Um, anyway, so
Yeah.
yes, so what we're asking people to do is to get on board with this, become an ambassador, come to the screening, have a look at the film if you can, or come to the webinars, get involved, and then spread the word. Uh,
Mm. Yeah.
and get people on board and start this conversation happening.
Yeah.
And then maybe we'll come up one day with a very positive solution to what happens to children who are in trouble and need somewhere to live and need to leave their families. Because last thing I want to say really is this: I recognize there's a lot of abuse and trauma outside of boarding schools.
Definitely.
I mentor young men out of prison with a charity called A Band of Brothers. I know that there's abuse going on, just the same sort of abuse. The difference is that if one goes to an institution which trains you to become a leader,
Mm.
then we're just passing that trauma and that survival personality and that cover up and that non-empathetic, power hungry, crazy, greedy
Mm.
uh, ambition down the line. And I do a lot in my life to help those that aren't leaders with their trauma. And
Mm.
I think we have to concentrate on those that have power or desire power. As
Yeah.
Giles Moffat says, desiring power and gaining power can help numb the body of, of trauma.
Mm.
But it certainly doesn't help the people we're in power over.
Mm. Mm.
As we're seeing, with a lot of government, everybody's moans about the government, about people in power. You know, why? Why are we moaning? Because they're just not seeing the diversity of normal life.
Mm.
I remember what somebody said that they went to Eton and in the 60s and they had to dress up in black and white with starched collars and black coats and they would walk out of the gates and in the early 70s everybody was in tie-dye and colors and all that and it's like an alien world.
Mm.
You create this liminal enclosed space which is not like normal life at all. So
Mm.
if I'm empowered over people who are living a normal life, then I've got to consider their lives.
Yes,
Uh,
definitely. Well, thank you, Ben. Thank you for your time today. And so,
thank
yeah.
you.
So, what I'm hearing is 1st of March, London, and
Yeah,
then the webinars. And if people are interested, so, our website will be live by the time this
yeah.
goes live on Friday. So, you can watch the trailer on the website and then put your name into the email box and your email address, and then we can send when the webinars go live. It's like we'll send links to that.
And go on the Rio Cinema website, put in
Mm.
boarding on insanity. It's up there live. Book some tickets. Come along. Have an amazing afternoon. Come and
Yeah,
meet us, the filmmakers, and everybody that was in the film. Some of the people who were in the film, and let's start this conversation.
Yeah, yeah, and I'll put that into the description. But yeah, thank you. It's been a real pleasure speaking today and doing the film. So
Yeah. Oh yeah. And
incredible journey. Thank you,
yeah,
Ben.
what a journey.
Yeah, thank you. I have the memory of walking across Waterloo Bridge and I'm so nervous. I've got this thing, camera strapped to me, and you're like, let's make mistakes. And I just always remember that, how heartfelt and relaxed it was. So thank you. I really
No, it's
appreciate your support, Ben.
joy. You're a natural. Right.
Yeah, I don't feel like it, but yes.
Well, that's yeah, that's the paradox. Nothing is what it seems in the film industry. We try and create something, but being honest is the best way. And I think
Mm.
documentary can do something you can't get better than real life.
Mm.
And it's time for us to uncover what's really going on.
It is. It is. Well, bless you, Ben,
Yeah,
and I will see you on a call probably in the next couple of days.
yeah.
So
The next couple of hours, probably. All right.
probably, yes. Yeah. Okay. Take care,
See
Ben.
you
Bye
soon.
bye.